Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Film Florida podcast. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.22 for our 2022 fundraising campaign. We also have a Film Florida merchandise page. Visit filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. Colonel Glen Roberts is the Chief of Entertainment Media for the United States Department of Defense. Colonel Roberts works out of the Pentagon, and his team is responsible for projecting and protecting the department's image in the entertainment space, including films, TV shows, video games, and events. He serves as the primary point of contact between the DoD and entertainment studios, production companies, guilds, industry associations, and more. Colonel Roberts works with both domestic and international film commissions to facilitate all types of projects, and he's a graduate of the University of South Florida. We talk about a typical request of his office, the challenges of incorporating real DoD elements into fictional stories, the political side of his job, and more on this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Here's my conversation with Colonel Glen Roberts. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Colonel Roberts. And first things first, of course, thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate that.
So let's start with your origin story. Help the audience get to know you a little bit.
Well, my origin story starts at Westover Air Force Base in Massachusetts, where I was born and raised. It's now called Westover Air Reserve Base, but at the time, it was a large Air Force base on the East Coast there in Western Massachusetts. So I grew up with B-52s and C-130s and C-5s flying overhead all day. I would see the Thunderbirds and the Blue Angels come out every year for the air show. When I was a senior in high school, Top Gun came out, ironically. Wow. And so, I may have been somewhat influenced by that movie a little bit to make a kid from Western Mass, have big, grandiose dreams of going to fly, jet fighters in the military. I was a perfectly average student, John. I had good enough grades to get into college, but not nearly good enough to get any sort of scholarship. Had to pay for college somehow, so I joined the Massachusetts National Guard, which allowed me to attend college, for free in the state of Massachusetts. So I went to UMass and I joined ROTC, hoping to get a pilot slot. But alas, that was in the peace dividend years of the early 90s, when shortly after the wall fell, and our pilot production fell about 75% my senior year. So no pilot slot for me, and the Air Force was gracious and said, what else do you want to do? And I was a journalism major, and so public affairs seemed like a great choice. And I have to tell you, I thank God every day that I've had, a really exciting and interesting career filled with great challenges and opportunities, and made some great lifelong friends, and a lot of travel too. So I've been very lucky, and I would say luck and timing have been everything for me.
Excellent. Now, if I read your title correct, you are the Chief of Entertainment Media for the United States Department of Defense. In doing my research, the department's been around a long time. Explain what you and your department do now.
Well, the department actually predates even the Department of Defense. This office, actually. It started back in 1923. This was still the Department of War. And in fact, it had a hand in the very first picture to win Best Picture Oscar in 1924. That was Wings. Wow. So our office has been in operation almost 100 years now, 98 years. And we've expanded. We now have 6 offices in Los Angeles, San Diego, and Washington, D.C. Each service has their own office: the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, Space Force, and the National Guard Bureau. Of course, our friends in the Coast Guard belong to the Department of Homeland Security, so they are actually in a different, a different executive branch, executive agency. But for us, our job is to inform and educate the American public on the roles and missions of the men and women in the Department of Defense and our respective services. And that's really what we try and do. We try and make sure that Americans see and understand what the men and women in uniform are doing on a day-to-day basis, what they're charged with protecting and doing, and how they do it. Ultimately, we work for you, the taxpayer, and you guys have a right to kind of see how we operate and what we do. And that's our role, is to bring this to you on a mass scale and show you exactly what your men and women are doing in the Department of Defense.
So how did you find your way into this role? I can't imagine this is a role you envisioned for yourself growing up.
Well, there's that luck and timing piece again, right? That thematic luck and timing that keeps coming back to me. I was very, very fortunate. I had a great, fun, exciting career that I loved. It was winding down, and I had one last job. And this job opened up in Los Angeles, California, as the director of the Air Force Entertainment Liaison Office. And I've heard of this job. And in fact, my very first assignment, again, things come full circle. But my very first assignment was at Patrick Air Force Base in Cocoa Beach, Florida.
Okay.
And back then, one of the earliest projects I ever worked was hosting a film team for the movie Armageddon,
Sure.
the Michael Bay movie that came out
Uh-huh.
in Florida. For us, I never envisioned that 24 years later, I'd actually be in that office doing that job. But lo and behold, that job came open, and I was very lucky to get it. And did that job for about 4 years, and I retired from active duty. And I thought, wow, what a great cap to a fun and exciting career. It was fun. I didn't think I'd ever be able to do it again. And I went off to the corporate world. My predecessor, Phil Strube, who you may have heard of, has had this job for 37 years, this exact job. Phil was a legend in the industry, and I could never replace Phil, never want to even try. I did not see this job coming open. Phil left, and he was replaced for a few years by a colleague and good friend of mine named Dave Evans. And when Dave retired to move back down to Florida, this job came open, and there it was. I threw my name in the hat and got extremely lucky. So there, again, there's my luck and timing.
Uh-huh. No, I can completely relate. Don't worry about that. So take us through your process on a high level. Someone wants to incorporate something from the United States military into their project. What is the process?
So everything starts with a phone call for us. It's a very simple process. Most of it is a quick phone call to either my office here in the Pentagon or to the service level offices out in Los Angeles, San Diego, or across the river, in Arlington, Virginia, for my National Guard colleagues. But a simple phone call is all it takes. And we'll send you a one-page production assistance request, we call it. It's basically the 5 Ws. You can fill it out by hand in about 3 minutes. It's very, very easy. Just tell us what your project is, what you're asking for. And then we'll ask you, if it's a scripted project, we ask for the script, the full script in its entirety, to evaluate that. And if it meets certain requirements that we can talk about, then we're happy to produce what we call a production assistance agreement. It's about a 6-page document, spells out what legally the Department of Defense has to do and what we require of folks asking for support. So it's a very simple process. It's a simple evaluation process, but we do have a couple of requirements. The first is, if it's scripted, we need to see the script. Second, we need to make sure that any project that comes to us has funding and distribution, because we need to make sure that we're good stewards of taxpayer dollars and assets, and that we're utilizing something that's actually going to be seen, not something that we hope that might get sold at a film festival, et cetera. So we do the best we can to offer cursory support in those cases, but for real support, we do need that funding and distribution in it. And then lastly, we don't do location only shoots. So the project really does have to contribute to informing and educating the public on the roles and missions of the Department of Defense. For instance, it's not enough to say, you've got a great, road along the beach there in Florida, and we'd love to shoot a car commercial. Unfortunately, we can't help with those. We have to show things that really impact the Department of Defense and help inform and educate that public.
And so are there initiatives that you try and encourage scripts to include or not include? I mean, are things that, you want to try and help along the way? How involved do you get in the creative process?
So we try very hard to stay out of the creative process to the best of our ability. As a general rule, we never pitch. I never cold call studios and go, hey, I got this great idea. Those great ideas will come to themselves. We're not the artists. We're not the creatives. We're here to provide support to help those artists reach their creative vision. We do have things we like and we don't like. I'll give you one example is, for instance, post-traumatic stress, or what some people call PTSD. We don't call it a disorder. For us, it's post-traumatic stress. So we've dropped the disorder. But for us, post-traumatic stress, if I had a nickel, John, for every script that I read that has the broken soldier or Marine coming back from combat and has post-traumatic stress, that's a very, very real and serious problem. It isn't a small amount of people. It is a real and present problem, and we deal with it often. I'm not interested, to be honest, in propagating the myth that every single person that comes back from a combat deployment has PTS or is a danger somehow to their fellow citizens out in the workplace. So I won't say that we completely don't get involved in the creative process, but we're careful in what we select to support. We want to make sure that it upholds the integrity of the institution. We're okay if your project, especially the scripted projects, have a villain who's in uniform. We're not perfect. We're an organization of people. But what we look for is to ensure that storyline upholds the integrity of the institution as a whole. That's really what we care about, because we really do believe men and women put this uniform on and die in the service of their country. I owe it to them to protect that image. And so my job is kind of to project and protect two aspects. And I take the protection aspect very seriously. It's okay to tell stories. It's okay to laugh at ourselves and be the butt of jokes sometimes, but it's not okay if we think that something is factually inaccurate or is really hitting at the honor and integrity of the institution as a whole.
Well, so, I mean, I think I know the answer, but I'm asking so you can articulate it. What is the most challenging part of the job?
I would tell you it's parking in the Pentagon parking lot, and the 20-minute walk in and the rain, the snow, or the heat. No, I wish that was it. So there's a couple of aspects to that. Really, for me, it's sometimes the toughest part of my job is when we're unable to help filmmakers and support them, even though we may love the project. Some of them just don't have anything to do with the Department of Defense. And so when we get them, often they're documentarians, although we do more I'd like to say for the record, we do far more documentaries than we do feature films or television, episodic television. But sometimes they don't have that funding or distribution. They have a great idea. They have a great vision. I know it would be a great project, but I just can't help them and commit resources to that because they don't yet have the funding or distribution. And so I hate to be the bearer of bad news when they come and they ask that. I try to help as much as I possibly can through cursory support. I offer them existing B-roll. We offer them sometimes base visits or to sit down in the writer's room with subject matter experts. Those are things I can do for anybody without actually going into a production assistance agreement. Often I'm able to do that. But I'd say it's that little heartbreaking time when you have to call that small production company and say, I love your project. I love what you're doing, but I just can't get there yet. Please come back to us when you have funding in distro, and then we're able to help. And then the other piece I would say lastly is there are these hybrid news pieces / documentaries that come in. So we have a very distinct line. I don't work in the press operations building, press operations section of DoD Public Affairs. That's a very different entity. They sit across the hall from me. They're my friends and colleagues. But I do not work in the press area. And so for me, when we get press organizations that are also in the documentary business, they often want to be treated like press, but also have the access of a documentary. And for us, that's a very, very different scenario. We require a production assistance agreement. We require a right of review, which we would never require, a journalist would never submit to, and we would never ask them to, because a free press is important. So for me, that can be difficult navigating those discussions sometimes with news organizations that want to do a documentary and they want our assistance with a documentary. We say, great, here's the production assistance agreement, please sign this. And they say, but we're media. Then I say, well, then you have to talk to my friends across the hall in the press office who can help you as media. So there is that fine line that we have to walk. And I would say that's also a challenging part of the job.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would have never actually thought about that. Do you ever have to have like serious sit downs with an executive producer or producer so they understand the seriousness of protecting the military assets and portraying things accurately?
I've never really had to have a sit down with them, because the good news is by the time they get to us, they understand what they're getting into.
Okay.
I will say there are filmmakers that like to work with us repeatedly, that we have great relationships with, that come to mind. People like Michael Bay, who we've done multiple projects with. Tom Cruise, we've done multiple projects with. Tom Hanks, we've done multiple projects with. And their production companies and the studios that we deal with, they understand what the requirements are. They understand before even coming to us, and they can often anticipate. Some don't even call us on projects because they know there's no way DoD. They know us so well that they understand that we wouldn't be able to support their project. So by the time we're in the discussion phase, in most cases, they understand very clearly the seriousness of protecting our military assets and our people, the importance we put on portraying things accurately. And for me, so far, to be honest, it has not been a problem in my years in uniform or my time here as a civilian we are very lucky to enjoy those great relationships and haven't had to have a serious heart-to-heart sit down with any of them.
So it sounds like maybe you've never actually had to walk away from a project that you initially agreed to because things just weren't going well.
I can think of one instance where that happened, where somebody caught something classified on a camera, and they were asked to delete it, and they did not delete it, and it became a very real issue, and we had to shut production down. Other than that, I honestly, the ground rules are laid out very, very well. They're spelled out, and the people we deal with are obviously very professional on both the military side and the production side. There's a lot in common between the military and the production teams. I mean, we
Hmm.
are traveling vagabonds in some ways, right? We get out there and we can go to a place that is completely empty and set up an entire camp in one day and do our mission and break it down and move again and do it again the next day. We have a very driven mindset. We are very like-minded in that singular vision of accomplishing your mission safely and quickly, and then moving on, in a professional way, moving on to the next thing. So I would say there's a lot of similarities between the film industry and the military that I see on a day-to-day basis. It makes me smile sometimes. But generally speaking, from walking away from a project, I would say not something we've had to do. We turn down projects that we can't support. But as far as once we're through that, the production assistance agreement phase, we've never had to really turn back and turn
That's a
down a
really
project.
interesting analogy that you made, the commonality between the military and the production industry. I've never actually thought of it, but when you explain it, it actually makes a lot of sense.
It really is. I mean, it's famous. It's people that are driven, people that are driven towards accomplishment and a singular goal, and they understand the importance of teamwork. There's no way a production team is going to work without a massive team of people behind the scenes doing that. It's the same thing for the military. It takes a lot of things to get, we'll say, beans, bullets, and bubbas to the battlefield. There's a whole lot involved in the logistics of that. We say in the military that good generals know strategy, but great generals know logistics. I
Mm.
think there is such a logistics are at the heart of production, and logistics to me are also at the heart of the military. So I see this going on, and that those similarities to me are very stark.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you've crossed administrations in your roles, so your office isn't a Democrat or a Republican office, but do things ever get political when it comes to specific requests or response to how the military is portrayed in a film?
You know, I'll tell you this. This is my 34th year in uniform or working for the Defense Department in one way or another, which is interesting for me. And in that time, I think I've had 16 years of being in a Democratic administration, and I think about, gosh, 15 or 16 in a Republican administration, or yeah, I think 12 at least. So for me, at my level, it doesn't come down to this. I will tell you that we're very lucky that I have leaders with a vision to protect and project that image of the men and women in uniform in this role. And that has crossed every administration. I really do believe troops are kind of the one thing in the political sphere that most people really revere and try to protect and try to take care of. So I have not seen personally, in a very honest assessment, I've not seen a difference between either one. I've just been very lucky to have bosses from both sides of the aisle that take good care of us, and that enable us to try and accomplish our mission in a safe and professional way. And it goes back to that professionalism term. At this level and at the levels of my colleagues in Los Angeles, we are professionals, and our leaders are definitely professionals and enablers, and they take good care of us and enable us to get our job done. So I have not had a political influence. I do have current event influences that come through.
Hmm.
As the world turns and world events happen, clearly those are impacted. I remember I was on a movie shoot in Hawaii when I was in active duty Air Force, and the government was shut down. And we had to
Wow.
make a determination, what are we going to do here? Because it was essential duties only. And so we actually had to shut down our support to that production, which is no small thing when you
Hmm.
have a movie that's in the tens of millions of dollars, and we have to cancel production for 12 days. But it's the right thing to do because we work for the American people. And that's really, it wasn't really even a choice in our mind. It was just something we had to do. Fortunately, we had a great relationship with that studio and with that production team. They were able to pivot, do some other scenes, and come back to us 12 days later when the government was reopened. So sometimes those events do impact us, but generally speaking, whether it's right or left, whether it's Republican or Democrat, that has had no bearing, to be honest, on the portrayal of the professionalism of the men and women in the department.
That's good to hear. Now, talk about the challenge of incorporating real life United States military into a completely fictional story. So there's always that thought watching a film or television series where you say, well, that's not realistic, but you're watching a fictional story. But if the military is involved in your role, does the portrayal of the military need to be realistic, or can that also have a little bit of gray area because it's a fictional story?
I'll give you that fighter pilot answer. It depends.
Okay.
And so for us, that's the fighter pilot's favorite answer. It depends. But for us, what it is, we get a lot more latitude when it is a fictional story. If we're working on an Iron Man or a Captain Marvel, we want to assure that that is portrayed as authentically and credibly as possible. We want to make sure the ribbons are right on their uniform. We want to make sure the uniform is worn correctly. We want to make sure that the nomenclature and the dialogue is correct. For instance, if you wouldn't say you're an Air Force pilot who's flying an F-18. Those are Navy airplanes. And so we work hard to make sure that, we are correcting that and keeping it, even in a completely fictitious plot, to be as authentic and credible as possible. My favorite films are the ones to support the true stories of the heroism of the men and women in uniform. And we have plenty of those. You've seen Lone Survivor, you've seen Man of Honor, you've seen, Band of Brothers. You've seen those. Those are important to get right in a different way. But it goes back to what I said earlier about men and women, putting the uniform on and pledging their life and service to this country, and often, making that supreme sacrifice. I owe it to them and their families to get it right as often as we can. We take that very, very seriously. Myself, my colleague, Alon Ortiz, who works right here alongside me as the other half of the team, and then all the folks in Los Angeles, all of the services, we take that very, very seriously. And that's why it's important for us to review the script. That's why we look for those rough cut reviews. And that's really an important aspect of what we do. The last thing I'll say about that, John, is that we look for 4 things: security, accuracy, policy, and propriety. By security, I mean, I want to make sure nothing's classified, or we're not giving away tactics and procedures that, that would be of benefit to an adversary. Accuracy, we already talked about the importance of getting things right, the right dialogue, the right nomenclature, the right uniform, down to the right weapons and every aspect of it. Policy is, I want to make sure that we are not erroneously speaking out of turn and saying something that is at odds with actual DoD policy or federal law. For instance, we don't show military members conducting law enforcement activities. I've seen a lot of movie scripts come through that's against the posse comitatus law. So when I say policy, I mean, we would not support something typically that has an active duty military member conducting civilian law enforcement activities. And then lastly is propriety, right? We want to make sure that ethically, we don't show people that are injured or deceased on camera. We don't want to show grieving widows and children, in any exploitive way that shows, knocking on their door and having, difficult conversations. So those are the things that I would refer to in that instance.
So along those same lines, you were talking about some adversaries. Is it challenging when you may be dealing with other countries that the United States might not have the best relationship with? Do you ever receive pushback because you're not portraying that political relationship accurately, or the international country may not be portraying the United States military accurately, even though it's a fictional story? Do those lines get blurred at all when you're dealing with some of the other countries?
It's actually surprisingly clear to me and to my colleagues when we look at this. So I'll have to say a resounding no, because it's very clear and unblurred to me, particularly when we're telling scripted true stories. There's lots of great stories out there, but whether the story is set in, we're fighting the Axis powers in World War II, or we're fighting on the Korean Peninsula, or we're in Vietnam, or we're in Iraq or Afghanistan, regardless of where that is, I will tell you quite honestly, I'm focused on the story and credible facts and the provable facts and the accuracy of that story, regardless of who the adversary is. So we have not had any instance that I've been aware of. I've been doing this now a total of 7 years, and I have not had an instance where a foreign government has had an influence to me personally on how I offer support to productions. I really can't think of a single instance.
Now, before we get to a few lighter things, we're doing this interview over Zoom, so we can see each other. But when we put out this interview, it's going to be audio only. So those that are listening can't see where you're actually doing this interview from, but it's incredibly intimidating. Can you describe where you are, and so people can get a sense of what I've been looking at for the last half hour?
Oh, that's scary. I got a face for radio, so hopefully, that's good that they can't see us. But John, I'm talking to you now from inside the Pentagon briefing room, in a small studio just off to the side of the podium. Podium's probably about 20 feet away from me. And from that podium, people like, multiple presidents of the United States speak from that podium. Secretary of Defense speaks from that podium. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the other members of the Joint Chiefs speak from that podium. There are great civilian leaders that speak from this podium. I've got a very cool picture that I'm so proud of, that on the first week of the administration, we have President Biden, Vice President Harris, Secretary of Defense Austin, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, walking down the hallway right into this room. And they're walking by a bunch of movie posters, because movie posters are up outside that we've supported. We're lucky to have those outside in the E-ring of the Pentagon. We've got this incredible group of, the most powerful people in the world walking into our press briefing room here. It's kind of a cool thing to see. But I'm reminded every day, and my colleagues are reminded every day, that we work at a very special place. I was kidding before about the Pentagon parking situation, but in all seriousness, when you think about what happens, this is the business of our national defense happens right here. Yeah. And like I said, decisions are made here that affect, millions of people, and really, it's a serious business. And so it's a solemn place, it's a respectful place, and it's an important place. And I'm reminded of that every day when I walk in. It's a pretty cool feeling to be a tiny part of it.
Yeah, and no offense to any of our interviewees that we've done over the previous 4 seasons of the podcast, but hands down, the best location for the interview is definitely going to be yours. And I don't know that anybody's ever going to be able to top that.
Well, we'll see. There's been some cool ones I've seen, but thanks for those words.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned Armageddon earlier, but I know you've been involved in a couple of different Florida-based projects. What are some of the titles that people would recognize?
Well, yeah, I would say, for me personally, not too many. I mean, I've done Armageddon in 1996. Most recently, I was able to go down to Cape Canaveral and work on Don't Look Up, which was on Netflix. We did a couple of space launch scenes out of Cape Canaveral. So thanks to the folks of the Space Coast in Florida who were very helpful with us going down there. And it didn't amount to a lot of screen time, but it was still an important scene in the movie. So we were proud to be able to work with our friends at in the corporate side of the house and commercial space launch, as well as the U.S. Space Force, which, as you know, has a great legacy up there. We're also working, some IMAX projects with, for instance, the Blue Angels. There's a lot of great projects who are, based in Florida, of course. So on any given day, we're doing a lot of different projects, and some of them touch Florida. And we're always proud of that recognition. But for me personally, I would say those were the most memorable ones, were Armageddon and Don't Look Up, that span. Obviously, that's a wide gap. I think we did Armageddon in 1996, 97 in Florida, and so good memories back there. And like I said, things do have a way of coming full circle. And there we are in 2021 shooting again. Don't Look Up. So a fun experience being there in Florida. And I will say this about your state. It's amazing. You have a very large military presence, and it is vast. You have Navy, you have Air Force, you have Coast Guard. There's so many things that are such a wide variety of demographics and roles and missions that the Department of Defense performs down there. You have U.S. Central Command, U.S. Southern Command, and U.S. Special Operations Command, all based in your Florida. 3 of the 9 combatant commands, those are the big 4-star commands. The most important warfighting commands in the world are based right there in Florida. And so that we don't take that lightly. And anytime we get a chance to get down there, and do projects in Florida, we're very excited. And anything I can do to help get things done in Florida, I'm always happy to do.
Well, we're obviously really proud of the history of the film industry here in the state, and equally proud to be home to so many military operations here in the state of Florida. It is something that at least I can say firsthand that I do not take for granted. So I appreciate those words. And now, besides some of the Florida projects that you have talked about, is there any production that is like the most memorable, whether it was because it was fun or because it was challenging? Do you have one or two that are at the top of your list?
Well, I would say that there's, it'd be easier to list the ones that aren't fun, to be honest with you. We do about 10 to 12 scripted movies a year, probably about 10 to 15 episodic television episodes per year. We've got a 21-year history with NCIS. We've done some of their spinoffs. We've done NCIS New Orleans and now NCIS Hawaii. We've worked on Jack Ryan, the TV series. We've worked on, a variety of movies and films. Transformers, we've got a long history with the Transformers films and with Michael Bay's company in particular. I would say one of the most fun things, it was working on a Transformers film not long ago, because we filmed all over. We shot in the deserts of California. We shot in Michigan. We shot in Canada. We shot in the UK at Stonehenge. At the actual Stonehenge, which is really cool opportunity to get to do. And, as I'm thinking about it, the other fun things to do are the live events. We got to do this really fun event in 2016 called Rock the Troops that was put on by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
Yeah.
It was an old USO style show that had all types of performers. Dwayne Johnson brought along a lot of his friends. They were musicians and comedians and movie stars. I mean, literally Matthew McConaughey and Jack Black. And I just think of all the different people that he brought. And it was an incredible production on the flight line at Hickam. At the time, it was Hickam Air Force Base right there in Hawaii. And I think we had well over 100,000 people on the flight line.
Wow.
And that was just so much fun to walk out on a stage and peek behind the curtain and see just the massive amounts of people out there. The lighting, they had fighter aircraft in the background, and tanker aircraft and transport aircraft right there on the flight line, and the people are surrounding them and being entertained by these great comedians. It was all free for military members and their families, and just a lot of fun. And it was a lot of hard work. It was 2 or 3 weeks. One of my colleagues did the bulk of that, Christopher Stagner. And I was just lucky to be there with him and learn from him. But what a great fun opportunity to be there and to see that project come to life. And so I would say that was really one of the most fun things that I've done. It never hurts to spend a month in Hawaii. But aside from that, it was a lot of long days. It was a lot of hard days, but the payoff to see people's faces when they were interacting and getting autographs from all of these movie stars and celebrities, it was a lot of fun for them and a lot of fun for us to see that happen.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Now, you mentioned the requirement of funding and distribution for you guys to get involved in a project. But once you get beyond that, is there a difference in how you guys handle a television series versus a low budget independent film or a YouTube series or video game or any of those things?
I'll tell you, there is absolutely no difference from our perspective on whether it is a scripted production, an unscripted production, a blockbuster movie, episodic television, a documentary, a video game. We literally impact all of those. We work on all of those aspects, and we want them to be authentic and credible. So for us, it is absolutely no difference. We work on things like, for instance, country music television. Just had, they featured a lot of our people in some various locations for their annual award show. These are opportunities that we see that we're proud to present, and we give the same level of effort and support to make sure that production team gets what has been promised to them in the production assistance agreement. So for us, the focus is really on executing that production assistance agreement in a lawful way, and making sure that we don't break any ethics regulations, making sure that we don't run afoul of any federal laws or regulations, and making sure that we stay inside the boundaries of the Department of Defense instructions and our own regulations.
Now, when a production or a project reaches out to you for assistance, is there a cost for your service?
There is no cost for service from the Department of Defense per se. We do go back for expenses, and those are normally laid out to the production teams in advance. So for instance, if you're doing a film like Top Gun Maverick, coming out in May, That movie obviously had extensive Department of Defense support, and that was on an aircraft carrier. We're using multiple fighter jets. We're using all kinds of things. For those instances, or if we're shooting additional movies and offering support to major franchises, then we always go back and we have to calculate on a very specific basis the amount of money that it costs the taxpayer to utilize that. So ultimately, the taxpayer pays no dividend other than the salaries of our own team. They incur no additional expenses for support to our production, because we give that production a bill, they pay the bill, and that goes back to the general treasury fund of the United States. And so it's clear, it's transparent, and there you have it. It is at no cost to the taxpayer.
Yeah. So if they reach out to you and you guys are acting in, for lack of a better term, in a consulting role, there is no cost for that. It's just if they're using actual things from the military.
Absolutely. We're proud to provide cursory support wherever we can. And cursory support could be things like a base visit. It could be things like phoning into a writer's room to give them some dialogue help. Again, we don't pitch ideas to them and say, here's an idea, have this character do that, but if they say to me, I'm in the CIC of a big ship and I need to know how you're speaking, we'll get a surface warfare officer. If they have two pilots that are in a cockpit trying to have a conversation, we'll get them a pilot so that they can sit and listen. And the pilot will say, here's how that would actually sound. And here's what we're talking about. Space, a space officer talking apogee and perigee and, all types of, space discussions that are way above my knowledge and help and pay grade. So we work hard to make sure that we get that subject matter expertise to the right people so that it can be as authentic and credible as possible. And there's no cost for that whatsoever.
Wow, that's awesome. And so how can people get in touch with you if they have a project that requires your assistance?
We are findable on defense.gov. If you typed in entertainment, you'll find a link that will bring you to the community engagement section of defense.gov. And my contact information is there. I'm happy to share it with you here as well. Or you can reach out to the Air Force Entertainment Liaison Office, the Office of Public Affairs, Western Region for the Army. You've got the Navy, of course, has their office down there in Los Angeles. Our Marine counterparts are on Camp Pendleton, right down near San Diego. And our National Guard, you can find also through the National Guard website. So we are available. We're easy to find. You can call me anytime or drop us an email, and we're happy to have that discussion with you.
Excellent. Colonel Roberts, thanks for spending time with us today. I know you have obviously more pressing issues to deal with than an interview for our podcast. Thank you again for your service and for everything that you do for the industry. I really appreciate you being on the Film Florida podcast with us.
John, thanks so much for the opportunity. And thank you to Film Florida for what you guys do. And thanks for having me on the podcast today. I really look forward to working with Film Florida and hopefully doing some great productions down there in your beautiful state.
Thanks for listening to the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org or visit our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.22 for our 2022 fundraising campaign. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.